Hello and welcome. So glad that you're here for the final countdown election recap with Dr. Michael McDonald. We're going to give folks a few minutes to uh, come and get in the room and get settled. We're so glad that you're here and that you made it through the election. I know so many of you are working so hard to ensure that folks got registered and turned out to vote. Got all the education that they needed around that. So we're so grateful for all the work that you have done and really looking forward to hearing this recap and seeing what we can learn and take from that. All right, it looks like we have most of the folks here. So I'm going to get us started here. Again, you are joining us for the final countdown election recap. Yes, there we go. So this is our webinar. Here's our agenda for the day here for the next hour or so. So you've hopefully been sufficiently welcomed here, and just we welcome you to also again share in the chat your name, your organization, where you're joining from. We always like to see the different corners of our country that folks are calling in from and doing voter engagement, nonpartisan voter engagement as a nonprofit. The next thing we'll do is housekeeping. Just a few reminders. Then we'll hear some highlights from Nonprofit Vote from my colleague, Cheyenne Sapp. I'll do a little bit of an introduction for our speaker, and then our speaker will have the floor. Don't worry, we will have, as we always do, a time at the end for question and answer. And then we'll close us out for the hour. So announcements and housekeeping. Wanted to just remind folks that there will be a question and answer session at the end. Please do put those questions in the Q&A section of the webinar and not the chat. If you put it in the Q&A section, it really helps us to keep track of those so that we can respond to them in an efficient and organized manner. And then also as a reminder that the PowerPoint slides and the recording of this webinar will be sent to you after the webinar. It'll be sent to anyone who registered for the webinar. So if folks were not able to attend, or if you're only able to attend for a part of it, then you will receive that recording in your email afterward. And also closed captioning is available via Zoom. So please do use that as needed. I wanted to talk a little bit about who is Nonprofit Vote. Some of you all have been to many of our webinars and you're very familiar with this, but I wanted to just give you a refresher and a reminder that our mission is really about supporting nonprofits and nonprofit leaders who are doing voter engagement. And that ranges from voter education to connection and candidate engagement to ballot initiatives, and then get out the vote efforts and all kinds of other voter education. And it's really about ensuring that the folks that you are serving have access to an inclusive democracy. And we know that our world is better and our country is better when we have an inclusive and representative democracy. Next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cheyenne Sapp, who is the campaign director for National Voter Registration Day. But she's going to talk a little bit about the work overall of Nonprofit Vote. So passing it on to you, Cheyenne.
Thank you, Glenn. And so nice to see so many of you. Many of you have participated in NVRD. So great to see you again. Thanks for being here. I'm happy to share a few of the major highlights from this very exciting year. 2024 It was nonstop. So in the early part of 2024, we released the Nonprofit Power Report, which found that individuals engaged by nonprofits were 10 percentage points more likely to vote than comparable community members. And voters of color engaged by nonprofits were 12 percentage points more likely to vote than comparable community members. Nonprofit Vote partnered to create customized voter engagement guides, which many of you use, for 7 national organizations, including National Council of Nonprofits, United Way Worldwide, Social Current, Habitat for Humanity, and Covenant House, as well as 20 state nonprofit associations in Iowa, Maine, Nebraska, New Mexico, New Jersey, Arizona, Kentucky, Idaho, Tennessee, and Florida. We presented, trained, and spoke both virtually and in person on 71 occasions, reaching over 6,940 nonprofit and philanthropic staff and leaders. We hosted 13 free public webinars, drawing over 3,400 live participants, and that includes you. Our multi state field program provided funding, materials, and technical assistance to 7 anchor nonprofit organizations in 7 states, who in turn activated over 87,000 voters in communities that are served by those nonprofits. Our Philanthropy for Voter Engagement initiative presented at 10 events, reaching nearly 700 in the philanthropic sector, encouraging them to support nonpartisan voter engagement by nonprofits. And last but not least, there was National Voter Registration Day, which hosted 7 events and engaged a record-breaking 152 premier partners and 5,600 local community partners, with 65% of the community partners being brand new to the holiday. We also received a White House proclamation and a bipartisan Senate resolution declaring September 17th National Voter Registration Day. Across the holiday, we touched 2 million voters this year who registered and verified their registration, which brought the holiday's lifetime total to 6 million. All in all, it was an amazing year with much more to come as we shift gears to continue supporting nonprofits who are gearing up for local and state elections that are coming up in 2025. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Gwen for the speaker introduction.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. Yes, that's a lot of numbers. And we wanted to make sure that we also shared some pictures of this, right? There are folks, again, across the country who are doing this work. And so we really want to celebrate and uplift all of our partners at all these different levels. We're so grateful for the work you're doing, and it's helping to build a better and stronger democracy for us all. Great. So our guest speaker today is Dr. Michael McDonald, who is a professor of political science at University of Florida, and is also the founder, I believe, and director of the U.S. Elections Lab. We use this tool a lot on our team this year, looking at early voting and just tracking all kinds of data around the election. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. I'm not going to read his whole entire bio to you all because you will be impressed when he starts speaking, I am sure. So thank you so much, Dr. McDonald, and we're looking forward to what you have to share. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let you do that.
Well, thank you, Gwen, and thank you to Nonprofit Vote. I've been a advisor to the Nonprofit Vote for about a decade now, and they're a very great partner, and I'm sure many of you on this webinar can agree with me that they do wonderful work. So it's very worthwhile to support, and I'm happy to be here to talk about voter turnout. And I'm happy to talk to all of you. I saw a couple people I actually know on that list that was scrolling by. A lot of people I don't know, but certainly it's glad to meet you, even if the conversation is largely going in one direction. So I'm going to be talking about turnout in the 2024 election. This, in the past, many of you may have been familiar with the work that I was doing that was on this electproject.org website. We've moved that, so we've transitioned it to this new Election Lab website, and it's that URL that's in the lower left-hand corner. So a lot of the data that was there at the Election Project website, it's been ported over. That's where you're going to find the most recent data, and it's also where you can find lots of other data, like our precinct data, which a lot of people use for various purposes. You can find me on the socials at Elect Project. I've moved over from that place called X, and now I'm largely on Blue Sky, and we're happy to report my number of followers on Blue Sky has now exceeded my number on Twitter. So something's going on right there. Getting lots of good engagement over on Blue Sky too. So highly recommend it if you haven't already made the transition. All right, so I'll be talking about turnout. I did want to we had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I had to do the slides here. So bear with me. Hopefully this is working for everybody. So our election lab. Our election lab is um, really a group of faculty and students at the University of Florida. Here's a group of our last dinner that we had of the students and myself. And next to me is Professor Smith, who also is in the election sphere. So it's a group where we bring together our alumni. We've only been doing this for about 10 years. Already our alumni out doing really great work. They're in nonprofit space. They're in the campaign consulting space. They are in the off at graduate school, maybe in law school or PhD. Some of them are working on election administrators. So really great group. I'm sure our current group is going to go on to do great things as well. Some of the data work that we do, I mentioned this just briefly. One is this National Precinct Database. So we're the only group that produced a precinct boundary and statewide elections results database for the 2016 through 2020 elections. It was used very widely by the media. Just about everything that you know about redistricting in terms of the partisan effect of redistricting, that was coming from us through the work that we did in collecting this information. And it was used actually by some states and officially as part of their redistricting process. New York Times, Washington Post, AP, they were using it for their elections coverage and their redistricting coverage. And there were lots of other places beyond them. So this is a very widely used database. It's free up to 2020. Unfortunately, our funding expired in 2020. So we've gone to a pay for service model. I wish that we could make it free, but when 2030 comes around, my hope is that we're going to be able to keep this project moving forward, and we'll make everything available again publicly so that, again, we'll be able to evaluate what's going on with redistricting in 2030. All righty, so that is our precinct database, and many of you probably followed what I was doing on with the early voting. I've been tracking that since 2008, and this really transitions to what we know about the turnout in the last election as well, because part of that is how people were voting. So I've tracked the early vote around the country, and this is up to the point where we had election day, so I haven't gotten the final statistics in. In fact, I'm just today, Michigan provided the final data. So you know, we're just starting to get the final results in from some of the states, and that will be very interesting to look at in the days ahead. I'll give you some glimpse of that looking at Georgia in a few minutes. That website had 15 million page views this last election cycle. And I know the reach was much more. It was mirrored on the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS were taking the data and just putting it on their own websites. I couldn't stop them from doing it, so I just worked with them to make that happen, since they could have scraped the website. And I know, like, it was even more than that, because someone at some point took a webcam and pointed it at their computer screen, and it was on TikTok, and 20,000 people on TikTok were just watching a web screen. I don't, why would anyone do that? They could have looked at the website, but apparently it's more fun to look at TikTok. Who knows? So, so again, it had a lot of reach, a lot more reach than just what we're seeing here. But what we're really interested in are the turnout rates, and that's what I'll be talking about today. And I'll talk a little bit about what we might expect in the future. But the turnout rate, again, we're still to the point, there's just a handful of states that haven't certified yet. So, you know, we're not at the final numbers, but the numbers aren't going to change much at this point. Where they may change is really with the voting eligible population. This is something that I produced post-World War II. These statistics post-World War II are my product. Before then, it's other academics who are historians who, like Walter Dean Burnham, who's since passed away. He did some of those historical numbers. Gerald Rusk was another person who did some of the historical numbers. So the historical numbers before World War II are from other sources. After World War II, they're from me. And what are we doing? We're looking at the turnout rate of those who are eligible to vote. So we're not talking about voter registration. There's often a lot of confusion about that because election officials are publishing their turnout rates for those who are registered to vote. What I do is those who are eligible. So we're looking at the turnout of those who are citizens of voting age minus ineligible felons that I can track within the states. So that's basically what we're looking at. And the state laws vary about felon disenfranchisement, so I try to make as best a guess as we can from the data that we have on ineligible felons within the states. So that's what we're looking at here. If you go historically, then we're talking about things like white men with property, and the data isn't all that great, but it is what it is historically. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that. Why do we use this number? Well, Oregon's a good example of why we would be very much interested in those who are eligible to vote rather than voter registration, because Oregon recently adopted automatic voter registration. And so they were the first state to do it. And then, so in Oregon, if you register to vote, or if you go to a DMV office, you are automatically registered unless you opt out. There are different flavors of this across the country, but that's generally the model of what we think of in terms of automatic voter registration. And so the registration rolls increased in Oregon because of automatic voter registration. And so actually, you would say, well, this policy is going to increase turnout because, well, more people are registered and now they can participate. That first hurdle of voting has been overcome. But if you looked at the registration turnout rates, the turnout rates went down because the people who are registering weren't always people who intended to vote. And so actually the turnout rate, if you looked at registration turnout rates, it went down in Oregon. But if you looked at the eligible population, citizens who aren't felons, disenfranchised felons, turnout rates went up, as you might expect. And it's really this variation that we would see across the country in terms of voter registration policies. One of the reasons why the voting eligible population is a much better metric that we can make comparisons about the effects of different policies and look at turnout rates across time rather than relying on voter registration. So in this last election, we were at 64% or so. It's a little bit less than that at the moment. These numbers are going to change because there's still a lot of data that I'm going to get in the future from the Census Bureau. These are estimates, and I'll get sometimes I'm projecting forward population numbers. We'll get more solid data in the coming years, as it turns out. And so this is always a work in progress, but we're somewhere around 64%. In 2020, we were at 66%. So we went down just a little bit. And there's been a lot of consternation about, well, turnout went down. Well, you got to remember that in 2020, that was the highest turnout rate election since 1900. So we were doing pretty good in 2020, and we're still doing good in 2024. We are still above this high level mark that we had in the 1950s, 1960s of higher levels of turnout. We're still above that with the 64% that we're at. So we still have very good turnout. We just went down a bit. It's not a wholesale collapse of turnout as what we saw in this last election. If you look back in the midterm election, 2018, you'll also see that we had an exceptionally high turnout rate election then. 2018 was the highest turnout rate election for a midterm election that we'd had since 1914. So, people ask, well, why? And I'll talk about that more broadly. One answer is clearly once Donald Trump entered the scene, he inspires passions one way or the other. And so certainly once Donald Trump became president after the 2016 election, we saw turnout engagement really increase quite a bit. But there's another, I think, reason for this as well. If you look back historically, we did have that high turnout that was going on in the 1800s. And we don't really have public opinion polls. We have no public opinion polls from the 1800s. So we don't really know what was motivating people at the time. But there are two things that are very similar to what we're seeing today. What were those factors? One was that we were highly polarized. If we look at how Congress operated, the voting that was taking place on bills within Congress, the level of polarization, political polarization within Congress was very high during this period of time in the 1800s. That's very similar. We're actually similar levels as we are today as we were during those 1800 periods. So that's one plausible explanation. The other one is competition. During the 1800s, especially the late 1800s, small swings in the vote share could lead to big changes in the House and who would win the presidency because we were so closely divided. So high levels of polarization, closely divided, those are things that have also started taking root in our politics starting in the 1980s, and then it's progressed onward. And so that upward trend that we're seeing in turnout in more recent elections likely is related to that people think elections matter more. Politics matter more. And when people believe that elections matter more because they have a greater stake in who they think wins will matter to them personally or for the country, or they think that their vote matters because the election is particularly close, they're more likely to participate. We can see this in another way by looking at this next slide. So this is the turnout rates in the states. Now the blue dots here are the turnout rate in 2020, and the orange dot is the turnout rate for 2024. Go Gators! I'll do my Gator since I'm from the University of Florida. Blue and orange are our colors. So that's why I'm using those colors. But also you'll see they're green and black lines. And those green lines are the states that increase their turnout rates. And those black lines are the ones that decrease their turnout rates. And there's a general pattern you're going to see here. There are actually, even though turnout rate went down a couple percentage points compared to 2020, there were a couple of states that increased their turnout from 2020. And which states are these? Well, I know it's a very small screen. I apologize. There's going to be another screen in a second where we'll go into this in more detail. Larger font, larger numbers. But what are these states? They're the battleground states. Places like Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada. They're the ones that are seeing turnout rate increases, or at least staying very similar to 2020. And that's interesting. I mean, normally we don't see this sort of change. When turnout rates increase or decrease, it's like we're a boat sitting on top of this tide. And when turnout rates increase, everyone gets lifted up. It's not just one state that's going to go up and the others are going to go down. That's unusual. Seeing all of the states move together is a much more typical sort of pattern that I've observed over the course of looking at elections. But here we're seeing something different where one group of states, those battleground states, are going up and another going down. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of ink spilled over this, and people are going to be puzzling over it in the coming years. My intuition is telling me that it goes back to why do people vote? People vote when they believe that their voice matters. And so when are they going to believe it matters? Well, when the election is particularly close, and there was a lot of money being spent and a lot of voter mobilization. I'm sure a lot of the groups that are on this call were part of those efforts. And so when people are being encouraged, mobilized to vote, they're being given a message that their vote matters. You know, if you're from Pennsylvania, whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win. That was something that was being said in the media. So people hear that and they're more likely to vote. But there are other reasons why people are voting just besides battleground status, and we're going to get to that now. So these are the states that had the highest turnout rate in the 2024 election. And this cast of characters is pretty similar. I mean, you could have looked back to 2020, even though there's some of those numbers are changing and the order's changing, it's the same group of states that tend to be at the top. And there are some commonalities. Again, you see, as we're just going down this list, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, they're all on that list. There's some of those key battleground states. You could even make arguments that places like Minnesota, Maine, New Hampshire, some people talked about Virginia being a battleground. So some of those states, if you're on the battleground, yes, you're going to have higher turnout, and it shows up here. but there are other commonalities among these states as well. And so two of them, one of that I want to talk about, one is this vote by mail. So Colorado, Vermont, Oregon, Washington, those states, every active registered voter is sent a mail ballot, and they may return that mail ballot through the mail. They may drop it off at a drop box. They may drop it off at an election office or a polling location. The laws really depend on the state, of course. So there are different modes of how people can return those ballots. But we generally see those states with mail ballots tend to vote at higher turnout, higher rates. And this is something I published on Hawk a book, but don't buy the book as much as I'd love you to buy it. Buy the ebook version, because I have 800 citations to news articles of what happened in the 2020 election. And this graph is from the 2020 election. I recently published a piece with some colleagues about mail balloting in general. And this one graph I'm showing you in 2020 could be replicated in other years as well. And what is it showing? It's showing that on the x-axis, on the bottom there, horizontal, that's the percent of the votes that were cast by mail in the 2020 election. And then on the y-axis, we have the percent that turnout rate of the eligible population. And what you see is a very strong pattern that as mail ballot becomes more expansive, opportunities, and more people are using mail ballots, turnout rates are increasing. And then, I'll talk about Hawaii in a minute, as usually at the very bottom of the turnout rates. But if it wasn't for Hawaii, we'd actually have even more of a upward trajectory. They're just drawing down the average because they're also a vote by mail state. But the vote by mail states, or the states that are predominantly by mail, tend to have higher turnout as well. So there's something about the ease of voting, access of voting when it comes to mail ballots that seems to matter to turnout. And by the way, that turnout effect is even greater when we look at local elections or state elections. And again, the literature on this, the scholarship tends to think that, well, that receiving that mail ballot is a reminder that an election is happening. And so, especially if you're looking at a local election where turnout rates are very, very low, then getting that mail ballot automatically is a reminder, hey, I need to check this out. There's something happening. I need to participate. And if you look back at the history, the very first all-mail ballot election in the United States was held in Monterey, California, back in 1977. And the reason why they did it was a local bond issue, and they needed a threshold of participation of registered voters in order to get that thing passed. And so they decided this might be a good way to get people to participate. And that's been like really at the local level, the experience of mail balloting since. So to go back to go back this way. So mail balloting matters. The other innovation that we have here is same-day registration. And North Carolina doesn't do it on election day, so but everywhere else it's either on the early voting period or on election day. You can register and vote all at the same time. And my own research on this, other people's research, finds that same-day registration has about a 3 to 5 percentage point increase in turnout. It really depends on which study that you're looking at as to what that estimated effect is going to be. But it's a very solid finding in the literature that's a strong correlation between turnout and same-day registration. All right, skipping ahead. How about the states at the bottom? So they tend to share some characteristics as well. Setting aside Hawaii, and I think it's, talking with people from Hawaii, this has more to do with the fact that it's far from the mainland. U.S. politics doesn't seem to be a higher priority. Seems that it does not affect them as much as other states. The good news is that once Hawaii recently adopted vote by mail elections, their turnout rates actually went up. So it could be worse. They have increased participation through vote by mail and same-day registration, but there's still a lot of other structural reasons why Hawaii tends to be at the bottom of this list. Other states on this list, they all have, not all of them, but most of them have excuse required absentee voting, or they're not particularly a battleground state. So there's something, again, the sort of ease of registering and voting is much more difficult in these states. And that's why we see this negative correlation among the states that are the most restricted. Now, Oklahoma, who's on the bottom of this list, I like to point this one out. They actually do have no excuse absentee voting. And so you say, oh, some people do this as part of their research. They'll use a no excuse absentee voting as one of the variables in their model that they're going to show, and they'll find no effect because Oklahoma has same day registration, but it has no excuse absentee voting, but it has very low turnout. But what people are missing is that Oklahoma requires a notary in order to request a mail ballot. And that can be very difficult. When I do this to more public audiences, and I mention that, people just like laugh or they gasp when I say that, because people understand that getting a notary is actually difficult. That's costly. And so when we look back at this other graph here, and you look at Oklahoma being in that lower left-hand corner of the graph I'm showing you here, they have usually about single-digit mail ballot usage in the state, even though they have no excuse absentee voting. And it's this additional cost. It's something else. It's not just the no excuse absentee voting. And this is why this particular graph is about mail ballot usage. It's not about these laws like no excuse absentee voting. It's trying to look at the whole ecosystem of what it is that makes it easy for people to vote by mail. All right. We're just starting to get the data. I'm going to transition now to talking about the early voting aspect of this. Although we were just talking about mail balloting, which is, of course, early voting of a form. So we're just starting to get the states producing their vote history from the 2024 election. And Georgia was to my knowledge, I think they were the first state to produce this a couple of weeks ago now. And Michigan just produced theirs today. So I haven't had time to analyze it yet, but we've got Michigan. And we'll get more over the coming days as states certify, and when we get these vote history files from the states. And in Georgia, we also know the method by which people voted. So if you look at this chart, this graph, what's showing is on the left-hand side, it's got mail. Those are the people who voted by mail in 2020, early in-person, election day, and then did not vote. And so these are all the people in the first three categories: mail, early voting, in-person, early voting, election day, who I do have a record of voting. Those that did not vote are the people who have a record of voting in the 2024 election. So if you look over on the right-hand side, you'll see these same categories. And then so some of these that did not vote there are the people who participated in the 2020 election, where we have a record of them participating, but they did not participate in the 2024 election. Now, some of them could have moved, passed on. So, keep in mind, it's not just everyone making a choice. They may not have been physically present. But what we see here is that the lines are connecting the number of people who voted by mail and then voted by mail, or voted by mail, voted in person. And what I find interesting about this particular graph is those people who voted by mail and did not vote. And there's a good chunk of them that did that. And we know in the 2020 election that registered Democrats in states where we have party registration were more frequently using mail ballots. And so when we look at how people were voting in 2020 and 2024, I think once we get some of these party registration states and we're able to recreate this sort of graph here, we're going to see fall off of Democrats. And I could see this on election night. I ran the decision team, managed them for the exit poll organization that was responsible for turnout. And so as the election wore on, we could see urban areas were coming in lower than we expected on their turnout. And these are predominantly Democratic areas that were had lower turnout. And so people are already cluing in onto this. And I think we're going to see more of this in the coming months, that part of the story of the 2024 election is going to be that these urban, diverse areas simply were not participating at rates. They had higher levels of abstention than what we were seeing in rural areas. And so that is likely going to be one of the stories that we're going to hear about from the election. But we don't have party registration in Georgia, so I can't really tell you where we're going to end up. Here's early voting over time. And Georgia was seeing record in-person early voting on the very first days of early voting. That was going on in lots of places. That was unexpected. Early in-person voting in the past tended to be an area that the Democrats were strong in. That changed during the pandemic when lots of Democrats moved to voting by mail, but Trump was still disparaging all forms of early voting in the 2020 election. And that changed in 2024. And in 2024, he started promoting in-person early voting. And we could actually see the effects on the first days of early voting in places like North Carolina. We could see lots of Republicans showing up to vote, registered Republicans, and Democrats were not hitting their target numbers, even compared back to 2020 when there was the pandemic. And so this is one of our first clues that something was afoot in the election that might not work well for Harris. I had thought before the election that we might be like 48, 50% of the vote would be cast prior to election day. I think what we're going to end up, again, these are early estimates and we still have more data, and that a lot of that data won't be available until much later next year. So we got a long road to go before we know the final numbers here. But I'm expecting around 55% of the votes that were cast prior to election day in 2024. And that is an upward trend. It's just part of this upward trend. Why is that upward trend happening? Well, it happens for two reasons. One is that we've got more states adopting early voting options. There was some retrenchment in 2024, so it wasn't universal. Certainly in my home state here of Florida, it was more difficult to cast a mail ballot, and we did see lower usage of mail ballots. But generally, the upward trend, there's been an expansive trend throughout the country. And once a locality, or once a state, I should say, adopts some form of early voting, people like it. and the numbers tend to go up over time of people who are using it. So it's just two effects going on. More states adopting it, the options become even more expansive, and then more people are taking advantage of it over time. And so here we are, more than half of our votes being cast before election day. Now, of course, that number was much higher in 2020, but that was when there were lots of people who were voting by mail in order to protect themselves during the pandemic. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, just talk about the future and what we can expect. This graph, this is from the Census Bureau. That last graph, by the way, was also from the Census Bureau, the current population survey voting and registration supplement. And they just ask a couple of questions. They don't ask who you voted for, but they do ask if you voted and how you voted. So that's where we can get that prior graph I was showing you. This graph is those people who voted, how many of them are non-Hispanic white. Now, I'm using Hispanic as the Census Bureau term. That's what they use. So I'm just going to use that term. I know some people prefer other terms, but non-Hispanic white share of the electorate. And what you see here is starting sometime in the 1990s, we started seeing this steady downward trajectory on the non-Hispanic white share of the electorate. We'll get the 2024 numbers when we get them, but likely that trend, it's going to fit into the trend line. And I say that likely because this is what we can see from just census projections on where our population is going. Sometime around 2045, 2050, the United States will no longer be a majority white country. Whites will still be the plurality, so they'll be the largest group, but they won't be the majority of the country. And we're already seeing that in like K-12, and we're already seeing it in some states like California and Texas. So we know that these numbers are there, they're solid. And this gets me to the next graph, which is turnout by age. The lowest, the blue line there, that's the turnout rates for people who are the youngest. and the purple line is for those who are 60 and older, so the oldest. And you see a big gap there between the turnout rates of older people and younger people. And so what's happening here, and that's the up and downs have to do a lot with midterm or presidential election. And there's a lot that I can unpack there, but just understand that turnout rates for younger people tend to be lower than older people. So if we go back to this graphic, and I mentioned to you that K-12 is already more diverse than the older generations. As that more diverse population gets older, not only is the electorate going to become more diverse as a consequence of that, it's already happening, but their turnout rates are going to start going up as well. They're already starting to go up. And so this downward trend that we're seeing, if anything, it's only going to accelerate because we're only at like 70% or so, maybe a little bit more than that of the electorate that's non-Hispanic white. That trend is going to start picking up even more so in the coming years. And so as we look to the future, we are going to definitely see, I'm very certain of it, we're going to see a more diverse electorate than what we're seeing even today as the country as a whole becomes more diverse. Okay, with all of that, I know that's a lot of download of information. Go back to my original slide and just say I am pleased to be able to present this information to you and welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDonald. This, again, your detailed overview of so much of this, and really this is data that we're not able to find easily in other places. And so we're just so grateful to you for all, and your team for all the hard work that you put into this. We have, as expected, quite a few questions that have come through the Q&A. So as a reminder to folks, if you have a question that you would like answered, please do put that in the question and answer, the Q&A section. We're not able to really pull them out of the chat and still stay organized. So if you'll please add them in there, and we've got quite a few, we're going to try to get to as many as possible. So the first one here that I just want to kind of get out of the way here, actually give Dr. McDonald a chance to breathe. So this question we got says, this may have been covered in the presentation, but just in case, increasingly, I feel the down ballot races and issues are underemphasized. Does Nonprofit Vote have ideas, strategies, and resources to bring this focus? The answer about the Nonprofit Vote piece is that yes, we have been emphasizing these down ballot races quite a lot, and will especially this year, because that's really crucial. I'm going to share one resource that we have on our website in the chat here. This is a resource that we developed with the Right Questions Institute a few years ago, and is really helpful in making the connection between everyday services that government provides and the elected officials that communities are voting for. So if you're looking for that type of resource to help people make that connection, this is a really great starting place. There are lots of other resources on our website as well. So I encourage you to look there. So wanted to get that one started off, but if there's anything else that you have to add to that, Dr. McDonald, about local elections and ways to get folks engaged, please do.
Yeah, and we're doing some work for the Houston Endowment, and our target for there is predominantly the counties that are in the Houston area. But we've been collecting local election data. We've actually started posting some of that online. And one of the things we're going to be able to do is we're going to add some features to our data archive so that we have a better searchable database for that local elections data that we currently have. But unfortunately, from an election administration standpoint, I don't think people really understand that many local elections are run by the localities themselves. And when you get into these super small localities, we can't even get simple election results from some of these localities. It's actually quite stunning when we've been trying to collect this information. So we're hoping that just to start, it's still like we have to understand what's happening in these local elections. And unfortunately, because of just this very simple thing like getting the election results is difficult. We need to start from square one. at least from a scholarly standpoint, before we can even start asking the other important questions as to what's going on in these local elections.
Absolutely. I go back to the phrase all politics is local. And so we have to remember that and engage not just in a presidential election year, but in all of the years. The next question here is, what do you mean by percentage of non-citizen and total ineligible felons in your total voter count? So I think that's referring to one of the slides that you had about non-citizen or ineligible felon. Yeah.
So on the Election Lab website, there's links to voter turnout, and you can get the documentation that will really step you through all the steps of where these data sources are. But generally what I'm talking about is we start with the population estimates, which comes from the Census Bureau. The population estimates have the voting age population of the country. Now they're a little out of sync. I mean, they're a couple of years old already. And so we have to project those forward to the current election. Later on down the road, I'll get the 2024 numbers, and then we'll be able to get a better estimate of the voting age population. So now we're just working with projections from 2023, really. So not quite 2 years, and it's a year and a half. And so we'll get better numbers later on, and I'll constantly update these. But we start with the voting age population. And then the American Community Survey has, for states, they have an estimate of the non-citizen population. Again, that's a little dated as well, and we'll get better numbers from there in the future. But that's a survey, and it's got survey error related to it. But from that percentage number from the American Community Survey, I subtract off a percent of citizens. I subtract that non-citizen percentage from the voting age population. And then I look through the Department of Justice reports. So they do surveys of the states, the number of people who are probation, parole, in prison, and look at the laws within those states with respect to disenfranchising those populations, and use those reports that we're getting from the Department of Justice to subtract off those ineligible felon numbers. Again, and this is like a continual thing, that because those reports are a little bit out of date. So that's why I try to emphasize that, we've got the numbers now. There's error to them. We'll get better numbers in the future. I say this because the Minnesota Secretary of State is really upset at me at the moment, because Minnesota is usually number one on turnout, and they're not this year. It's Wisconsin. I think it has a lot to do with the sort of battleground status, and Minnesota wasn't thought to be one. But they want to be number one, and they're trying to convince me that, oh no, they're number one. And it could be end up at the end of the day that some of these numbers do change in a way that changes that ranking. But I kind of think that Wisconsin's going to be number one even after we get the better data.
Great. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. The next question here is about California. So if you're up for that. California also automatically mails ballots to all registered voters and has a huge population. How do you explain that it is not among the top voter turnout states?
Yeah, well, they only did it recently, so I definitely think there's a learning curve, and it's actually some counties opt in and opt out of that, so it's not actually all the counties, but yeah, some of the larger counties do it. And so it's like Hawaii. It's not a battleground, but yet adopting vote by mail did increase their participation, even though they have a very low turnout rate. So I really chalk it up to more of a Hawaii effect. And I don't know, maybe we'll see in the coming years that more efforts invested within California, and we're going to start seeing these turnout rates start creeping up even further than we're already seeing.
Yeah, thank you. The next question we've got here is, what are you seeing in terms of the gender gap for turnout? Do you have data around that?
Yeah, so our best source for that information is going to be the Census Bureau's current population survey. And that's the survey that the Census Bureau actually uses to calculate the unemployment rate for the country. So it's a good survey. It's a large survey. it's got like 150,000 respondents to it. There are a lot of quirks with it. Like we could talk about that separately, but it's a very large survey, and we won't get that data till sometime fall or so of next year either. So at this point, you know, you could look at the exit polls and infer some things from the exit polls, but you have to remember that's only the people who participated. So what typically people do in this period of time between now and when we get the current population survey data is they'll either look at other surveys or they'll take the exit poll number, they'll take the number of people who participated, and they'll look at the demographic profile of the exit polls. Maybe it's race, maybe it's gender, maybe it's age. And then they'll project out what they think. That'll be their numerator. They'll do that percent times the number of people who voted. And then they'll use some American Community Survey data or something like that as the denominator. And, you know, it kind of works okay, but again, my own research on the exit polls, and I work with them. I love the exit poll people, so I don't want to sound like I'm saying don't trust the exit polls, but don't trust the exit polls. They're not really designed to get these subpopulation numbers, good estimates on them, and so I would say let's wait till we get that additional data. We're going to get voter file data in the coming months. So that'll be another check. It's just the first set of data that we get are coming from these exit polls. We're going to get other data, and some of that data will confirm what the exit polls are showing. They probably will, but some of it will be in conflict with it too. And this is the problem when you have more than one watch and never know what time it is.
Very good point there. And I think that actually we're really close on time here. So the last question that I'll ask here, do you track any of the impacts on turnout in the few states that do ranked choice voting?
Well, I mean, we'll have the numbers, but that's there's really, you know, I've seen some studies that have like done difference approaches where they say like, you know, so they didn't have ranked choice and they did afterwards. There's, you know, some suggestion that it matters for like those primary elections for turnout, so that it increases turnout and participation. But we don't have like a large number of states yet. So it's hard to make generalizations beyond these case studies of particular states. Probably in the coming years, as we get more data, this goes back to like even the California question. Why is California so low? Well, you know, they don't have a lot of experience yet with mail balloting, and so we need more information. We need more data from a scholarly standpoint. That's how we're going to be able to best address those sorts of questions. So the initial studies say yes, it does seem to have an effect on turnout in a positive way, but you know, we have to collect more data before we can say more systematically what's going on with ranked choice voting.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. That is going to have to conclude our question and answer session. So we've tried to respond to as many as possible in the boxes there, but wanted to just close us out here, and thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. McDonald, for your time and investment in all of this. We are so lucky to have you and grateful for the work that you're doing. So folks who are here, wanted to remind you to take the nonprofit vote pledge. This is something that will connect you as a nonprofit that is doing voter engagement work, will connect you to other nonprofits and make sure that you have the tools and resources that you need to do nonpartisan nonprofit voter engagement. So please do take that pledge. And then just wanted to thank you all for being here. If you want to follow up, Dr. McDonald shared his information, I know, in the chat and in the slide there. You can also follow us on all the socials. We recently joined Blue Sky as well, so please do follow us there if you're there. You can also always contact us, check out our website And just a reminder that we offer these webinars, these tools, all of these resources for free to you all as nonprofit leaders. And so if you feel moved to support that work, please do, or pass the information along. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and new year, and look forward to some new webinars and new exciting opportunities in 2025. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.